Hey everyone, welcome back to Workshop Quick Takes. Today I'm doing spark plugs on this 2005 Honda CR-V. If you've avoided doing spark plugs because they seem hard, they don't have to be. Especially on a vehicle like this one, which has an inline 4-cylinder engine with an overhead cam. On this type of design, the spark plugs are usually located somewhere right near the top of the engine and are very easy to get to. You do need a torque wrench and a couple other miscellaneous tools that are specialized, but they're not expensive or hard to find, and this can save you easily a couple $100 in mechanics labor. So, let's take a look at it. Okay, in this engine bay, our spark plugs are located right underneath this cover, and we have to remove 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts to get at that cover. Quick comment on that. If you've been tempted to remove covers like that and throw them away, that may not be a good idea. Sometimes they are just cosmetic, but in this case it's helping protect the wiring over the coil packs. And in some modern vehicles, they also contribute to reducing sound levels that come out of the engine bay, and may even help with cooling. But we are going to remove this to get at our spark plugs, and that's step 1, requiring a 10mm socket. So for this first step, I have a 3/8 inch drive, an extension bar just because it's helpful, and a 10mm socket. And I am going to try and do all this with just hand tools to show that it's not that bad of a deal. Note that these two rear ones are a different type than the two front ones because we'll need to put them back in the correct places later. When pulling small parts out of an engine, it may be helpful to line them up the way they came out, and that way it'll be easier to remember where they go when you put them back. For this next step, I find that each of the 4 coil packs is held down with a bolt. 2 of these are standard, but 2 of these have these standoffs that help with holding on the cover. So I'm going to switch to a 10mm deep socket in order to get access to these. Also note that I will be removing these 4 plugs, but they're kind of hard to get at in here unless you remove the coil packs up first. Once again, take note of the order. From left to right, we have a standard bolt, a standoff, a standard bolt, and a standoff. So short, tall, short, tall. This job doesn't have to be dirty on a well-maintained engine, but I am starting to get into a little bit of dirt and grease here, so I'm just going to gently lift that up there. And notice it's tight over here, so I don't want to be too rough with it, but each of these now has to come up. And I'm going to just gently tug until it pops off the top of the spark plug. Applying pressure on both sides so that I'm not torquing the connection. Now once it's up, I can then push in the lever and remove the first coil. Now again, for housekeeping, I've got everything lined up the way it came out. The cover, the 4 bolts in order, these 4 bolts in order, and the 4 coils also again in order. In theory, all these should be interchangeable, but if I were having any issues with the ignition or a rough idle or whatever, the coil is one possible culprit, and so I want to make sure they come in and out in the same order for future troubleshooting. In this case, I could put them back in any order and it wouldn't make much difference, but you just never know. At this step, we have not actually opened up the engine, but you can now see the spark plugs down at the bottom of their wells. It's going to be a little bit hard to reach them down there, which is why we need a special tool called a spark plug socket. Many spark plugs on smaller vehicles use a standard 5/8 socket, 5/8 inch. But notice, if you can kind of see it, there's a little rubber thingy up in there. And what that does is that's designed to grasp on to the top of the spark plug and then lift it back out. That way, it doesn't just sit there and flop around in the hole. And once again, I have my 3/8 wrench and a short extension. Now, because this one happens to have a 1/2 inch drive, I'm going to use the adapter. I really don't want to be applying a 1/2 inch driver's worth of torque on these. They shouldn't require that to come out, and if they do, there's a chance something's going sideways. So let's just start over here on the left. Gonna need a longer extension, that's fine. Here's a longer extension. And again, these are standard threading, so lefty should be loosey and righty should be tighty. These may put up some resistance as they come out, but you shouldn't feel like you're actually tearing them out. If you are, there's a chance that one of them has seized and you're actually going to gall out the head, which on this car is an aluminum alloy, whereas the spark plug threads are steel. So the head is going to lose in that battle. If you get into a situation like that, sometimes the best thing you can do is spray a little penetrating oil down in the socket and let it try and work down its way into the threads before you continue. Okay, this one's just about out, I think. And that's how it should come out. Take a quick look at this plug. That actually looks pretty good from what I'm told. There's three ways this could look. One is it could be excessively whitish, kind of like right there, but all over the tip of the plug, which would not be ideal because that would mean that there was probably burning lean in here. It's usually unlikely with an EFI coil on plug ignition like we have set up like we have in this engine because the computer controls everything, but it's always possible. The plug is also not all black and foul. That would mean it was either burning too much gasoline, rich mixture, or possibly oil. But it's just kind of lightly bronzed and brownish there at the end. So my inclination is that it's been firing okay. If I remember correctly, these were also iridium plugs, so they should be very long life. And as always, NGK. Another thing to note here is this is 1ZFR6K11, and we'll look at that again in a minute. Repeat 3 more times. Again, another fairly good looking plug. Don't see anything that worries me about it, but we are going to go ahead and replace them anyway since we have replacements. Three down, 1 to go. So far, no problems. Okay, that's 4 all looking to be in pretty good shape, so doesn't look like our engine has any problems, and that's good news. We'll go ahead and put the new plugs in and hopefully get a lot more miles out of it. Alright, some important notes on our new plugs as we continue. I did buy these from the auto parts store. They looked them up for me. They should be the right ones. And if we compare part numbers, we should see the same thing we had before or something close to it since I bought from the same vendor. ZFR6AIX11S, 1ZFR6K11. These are both from NGK, so the part number comparison should be similar. I did go ahead and spring for the iridium ones. I know you can get the platinum ones for about 5.5 a piece, 6 each. These are more between 10 and 15 typically, but these are supposed to have a much longer life. Now, let's go ahead and pull one out. That 11 on the end, as I understand it with NGK, means that they're supposed to be pre-gapped at 1.1 millimeters. Gapping is the space between the spark plug's electrode and the return. So you look at that little tiny electrode in there, that's the part that's actually iridium tipped. And if I take a spark plug gauge, you don't have to have one of these with modern spark plugs, but it never hurts to check if you've got one, and these aren't expensive. I don't have a 1.1 millimeter on here, but what I do have is a 0.48 millimeter and a 0.53 millimeter that are pretty close to each other, which means I can flip them out and pinch them together and get 1.1 millimeters. So let's just take a look at the old plug real quick and see how it's looking. That's actually pretty good. There's not much change in the gap. So I could probably keep using these plugs if I needed to, but I am going to go ahead and put the new one in. Another thing to pay attention to is don't drop one of these. It'll bounce off of this, and then you'll have to try and straighten it out again, and that can be kind of a pain. Okay, so just to be sure everything's kosher, let's just check all 4 plugs to make sure the gapping didn't get messed up. Someone didn't drop it along the line. That one looks good. That one looks good. That one's slightly tight, but looks good. Yeah, also a little bit tight, but should be good. Okay, something to pay attention to comparing one of the old and new plugs. When we install these, notice that this here looks all flattened, whereas this here has a ridge on it. This is a crush washer. In theory, these are installed once only, and once you remove them, you're not supposed to put them back in. In practice, you can, and people do, but first time on, we want to try and get it in, get it right, get it torqued correctly, and when that washer crushes, you'll actually feel it go down a bit. Then you should have met your torque spec, but we're going to double check that using a torque wrench. This here's a cheap one. There is a nicer one over in the drawer, but for as little torque as we need to apply on these, this will be close enough. Things you can do to new plugs, and probably should do at least this, is put anti-seize compound on the threads before you install it. And that's especially the case when you are installing a spark plug, which has a steel barrel and threading, into an aluminum alloy head, because there is a real risk of the steel galling and even rethreading the aluminum in there, and that is kind of a pain to deal with. Note that if you don't want to buy a big tube of anti-seize compound because you're not going to use it again, you can, when you buy your spark plugs, just get the little pouches of it, kind of like ketchup packets at the auto parts store. They'll also have dielectric grease, which normally goes inside these boots when you reinstall them. Okay, so we're ready to put the first spark plug back in, And this is the exact reverse of what we did before, is it's going to go in the socket, press it in, and this time I'm not going to start it with the ratchet. I'm going to start it by hand to try and make sure I get it threaded in there without wrecking anything. I'm going to try and lower it straight into the hole, and the socket will help guide it down. And I'm going to try and thread it in as far as I can by hand before I get out the rest of the tools again. Oh, there we go. I think I got it. Yep. Test. I should be able to pop this back off. And I left the spark plug socket in there. That happens sometimes. There we go. Number 2, same procedure. Snap that in. Gently lower it into the spark plug well. Try and center that and twist it by hand until I feel it catching and going in. And I think it's tight. Apply a little tension to get the spark plug socket off, and there we are. Number 3. Ooh. Okay, I just had a bit of an annoyance happen. That little rubber grommet actually stayed on spark plug 2 down there. Try and put the socket back in, see if I can get it off with that first. Okay, so here's a 1/2-inch drive extension. Much more effort. So I'm going to try and put that back on there. Come out. Of course, the last thing I want to do is accidentally fumble that ring and drop it in one of the open wells. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those, because it would be very, very hard to fish that thing out of the combustion chamber. Those aren't quite long enough. I may need to take a wire and just pull that off. Alright, I have myself here a tool made out of galvanized electric fence wire, but any kind of stiff wire would work, including a coat hanger if it came to that. And there it is. Tricky little bugger, but I got him out. Okay, hopefully prevent that from happening again, I put just a tiny amount of the anti-seize on top of here, and that should lubricate it slightly. Still snapped in, so that's good. And it did it again. Might have to buy a replacement socket. Okay, 3 down, 1 to go. Okay, now that I've got 4 plugs in, I'm going to just go ahead and give them just a gentle tightening until I feel that crush washer going. So, stop there and get the torque wrench next. Notice that that's not even a full turn from hand tight. I don't want to go much farther than that until I put the torque wrench on it. Okay, quick comment about torque wrenches. This one here is marked in foot-pounds and Newton meters, so whichever spec you have handy, make sure you're looking at the right scale. And make sure you don't apply foot-pounds when the spec said inch-pound, because inch-pounds are not foot-pounds. You need to convert them using Google, or if you know the formula off the top of your head, great. I understand that the spec for this is somewhere between 10 and 15, and that's typical for spark plugs on a lot of light passenger engines. So I'm just going to try and get them a little over 10 on this scale since it's not super accurate, and that should be pretty good. Okay, I'm pulling to just about 10 to 15 right there, so that's as far as I want to go. Keep in mind that it doesn't take much to just twist these right through the aluminum of the head, and that's not what I want. If you have a clicky type torque wrench, make sure you don't twist past the first click. This one here, I just want to apply pressure, and yep, 15. Okay, I did forget one thing when I was at the auto parts store, and that was another one of those little ketchup packets I was describing earlier, except this one would be called dielectric grease. Where dielectric grease goes is up here inside the terminal contact, and since I don't have that, I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of this, just general purpose red lithium grease, not a lot. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing, because what you want to do is make sure you don't have any moisture included up in here that's going to corrode and foul the connection. Okay, these go in exactly like they came out. Start to drop it in, reconnect the connector, and then press down gently onto the spark plug and it should just seat. And then I'll be putting the screw in last. Okay, we're back to a 10mm socket. Remember, the first one was a short, standard bolt. So you work it into the right hole there. And actually, I might as well put in just a small amount of anti-seize on these because, again, steel bolt into aluminum. This will just help the thread better. Doesn't take much. We're not trying to frost a cake. We just want it to pick up and go in. Oh yeah, that's much better. These need to be firm, but I don't need to torque them to the moon. I just don't want it to back out. There is in fact a steel sleeve in here that takes the tension so that it's not pressing down right on the plastic and cracking it, but you still don't want to get carried away. Next one was a tall one. Another short one. And finally, one more long one. Next step, I could go ahead and test fire it, but I'm going to go ahead and just reply this cover and do that first because it's not that hard to remove these 4 bolts if something doesn't work out. Remember, these 2 front ones just have these little caps on them. Again, an excessive amount of torque is not required here. And 2 long ones going back here and here. Job done, I hope. Final test. Let's fire it up and see how it goes. Well, it fired right up. It's idling, and I revved it without getting any stumbling or tripping any check engine lights. So I think we're good. Well, there you go. I hope that inspires you to tackle a new piece of maintenance if you haven't done this before. And if you have, don't forget that somewhere between 50 and 100,000 miles is where your spark plugs come due on a modern vehicle. Thanks for joining us today on Workshop Quick Takes. See you next time.
Has anyone seen my phone?